Layla gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath catching as the officer's voice rang out through her car window. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, his tone as sharp as the glare of the patrol car's flashing lights behind her. Her heart pounded against her chest. How could she explain that she physically couldn't comply? The air inside the car felt suffocating as panic started to take hold. The day had started so peacefully, with Layla savoring her morning coffee and a quiet sense of accomplishment as she prepared for a simple meetup with friends. Driving had become a symbol of her independence, a victory over the accident that had changed her life forever. But now, parked on the side of the road, her sanctuary was under siege. The officer's towering presence outside her window shattered her sense of safety. This wasn't just a routine stop, it was a confrontation with assumptions, power, and prejudice. As the officer leaned closer, his words cutting like a blade, Layla's resolve stiffened. She wasn't just a disabled woman trapped in a car, she was a fighter who had rebuilt her life brick by brick. What happened next, however, would leave both of them, and everyone watching, forever changed. Welcome to Real Life Stories New, where narratives like these challenge your perspective and uncover the resilience of the human spirit. Watch as Layla's courage takes center stage in a battle that is far more than a traffic stop. Will she rise against the odds, or will this day rewrite her journey forever? Layla's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her mind racing as the officer's voice echoed in her ears. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his tone cold and unyielding. She glanced at her prosthetic legs, an unspoken reminder of her reality, and took a steadying breath. This wasn't just fear. It was humiliation, bubbling beneath the surface and threatening to spill over. "Officer, I physically can't step out," she said, her voice calm but firm. Her stomach tightened as she searched his face for any sign of understanding, but his expression remained stony. Instead, he leaned closer, his shadow darkening the interior of her car. "I said get out," he barked, his hand brushing the edge of the door handle. Layla's chest tightened. She felt cornered, every inch of her autonomy slipping away under his oppressive gaze. The vulnerability she fought so hard to conceal was now laid bare. Would this man even care if she told him about the years of grit and resilience it took to regain her independence? "I can't comply with your orders," she repeated, her voice shaking now but resolute. "I don't have the ability to stand." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant. For a moment, she thought she saw hesitation flicker in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Without another word, he yanked the door open, the sound of the latch releasing like a gunshot in her ears. Before she could process what was happening, his hand clamped around her arm, and he began pulling her forward. "Let me go," Layla cried, her voice breaking as panic set in. Her prosthetics shifted awkwardly, one twisting out of place, the metal frame clattering against the pavement. The sound was deafening, a cruel reminder of her reality. Around them, murmurs began to ripple through a growing crowd. "She can't even walk," someone shouted, their voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Layla's breath hitched as she caught sight of people raising their phones, cameras trained on the unfolding scene. It was no longer just her fight. Strangers now bore witness to her struggle, and their presence brought a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. The officer's grip tightened, his frustration boiling over. "You think you're above the law?" he hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't care what excuses you have. Get out now, or I'll assist you further." Her mind raced. She could either give in, let herself be dragged completely into his control, or she could resist, not physically, but through the only weapon she had left, her voice. "I told you, I can't," she shouted, her desperation echoing louder now. The sting of tears blurred her vision, but she refused to break. "What you're doing is wrong. And you will be held accountable." His hand hovered near his holster, his posture taut and threatening. Layla's pulse quickened as the officer made his intentions clear. This wasn't just about compliance anymore, it was about dominance, about stripping her of her dignity. And then, just as the situation threatened to spiral further out of control, a new voice broke through the tension. "Step back." The younger officer's tone was commanding, yet measured. "Derek," she thought his name was. He moved toward them, his tall frame intercepting the escalating scene. "You're escalating a situation that doesn't need to be. Let her go." The first officer turned sharply, his face twisting with indignation. "This is none of your business," he spat. "She's resisting, and I'm handling it." "She's not resisting," Derek countered, his voice calm but firm. He gestured toward the crowd. "And you're not just handling this anymore. The whole world is watching." The tension between the two men crackled like electricity. Layla could only watch, her breaths shallow, as Derek subtly positioned himself closer to her, his body language protective. "You need to step down, now," Derek said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For the first time, the first officer faltered, his eyes darting toward the phones held aloft by the crowd. His face hardened as he turned his glare back toward Layla. "This isn't over," he muttered, venom dripping from his words. But he released her arm, stepping away as Derek stood his ground. Layla's entire body felt like it was vibrating with adrenaline. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. As Derek turned to her, his expression softened, though there was a quiet fire in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost gentle. Layla swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm not hurt," she said, her voice trembling, "but I'm not okay with what just happened." Derek nodded, his jaw tightening. "And you shouldn't be. None of this was right." Around them, the crowd murmured in support, their voices blending into a wave of solidarity. For the first time since the ordeal began, Layla felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: hope. As sirens blared in the distance, signaling the arrival of more officers, she looked Derek in the eyes and said with quiet determination, "This isn't just about me. This has to stop." "I know," he replied, his gaze steady. "And I'm going to help make sure it does." For the first time, Layla felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Layla stood outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the pavement. She glanced at the crowd gathered around her, their cheers and signs a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped her only hours ago. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of closure, not because everything was resolved, but because she had faced her fears and spoken her truth. Inside the courtroom, she had found her voice. It wasn't just about her story but about the broader fight for dignity and justice. The moment she looked into the eyes of those who came to support her, Derek, Vanessa, strangers who believed in her cause, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing tall, even if not on her own legs, and that made all the difference. Layla took a deep breath, her prosthetic legs steady beneath her as she wheeled herself through the sea of supporters. Her determination had grown into something greater, a commitment to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She was no longer just a victim, she was a symbol of resilience, a voice for change. As the crowd began to disperse, a young girl in a wheelchair rolled up to Layla. "You're so brave," she said softly, her eyes wide with admiration. Layla smiled, her heart swelling. "And so are you," she replied, reaching out to take the girl's hand. Moments like this reminded her why the fight mattered. It wasn't just for justice but for hope, for a world where no one felt invisible or powerless. If this story moved you, please like, share, and help Real Life Stories New reach 10,000 subscribers. Together, we can shine a light on stories that inspire and change lives.
My daughter banned me from her wedding, so I canceled the venue I paid for. So I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. My daughter, Laura, she's 28 now, blocked me from her own wedding. Let that sink in for a minute. I was blocked from a wedding that I was literally paying for. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but I figured sharing this here might help me sort things out, or at least let me vent a little. First off, let me just say this. Laura has always been a bit of a handful. Even when she was a kid, we had our ups and downs. But what parent and kid don't, right? Still, I never imagined things would go this far. I mean, yeah, we've had disagreements in the past, but nothing that would make me think she'd go this extreme. Anyway, I'll try to keep this as clear as possible. Laura has been with her fiancé, Matt, for a few years now. They're not exactly rolling in money, so when they started planning the wedding, I offered to cover the costs. Seemed like a nice gesture, and honestly, I wanted to help them start their marriage on the right foot. I know weddings are expensive as hell, and since they were struggling, I figured why not? It was my way of showing support. I was happy to do it, and I thought she'd appreciate the help. It's a big moment, right? Your daughter's wedding, the day your kid steps into a new chapter of life. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but maybe a little gratitude would have been nice. But things started going sideways not long after that. So fast forward a bit. The wedding planning is well underway, and Laura seemed to have everything under control. I wasn't too involved in the little details. Honestly, I wasn't trying to micromanage her wedding. I trusted she could handle it. But one day I thought it'd be nice to add my brother, Mark, to the guest list. He and Laura have always been close, and I figured it wouldn't be a problem. Just one more person, right? No big deal. I called up the wedding planner to ask if they could add Mark, and that's where things got weird. The planner sounded kind of awkward when I asked. He hesitated and then told me the guest list was full. Full? How is that possible? It's a wedding, not a movie premiere. You can always squeeze in one more, right? So I pushed a little, thinking maybe he misunderstood or there was a mistake. Finally, after some back and forth, the planner sent me the guest list. And let me tell you, when I opened that list, my heart stopped for a second. I wasn't on it. Neither was Linda, my wife. I'm sitting there, staring at this list of people I barely know, but my own name isn't there. Not mine. Not Linda's. At this point, I'm beyond confused. I thought, there has to be some mistake. I mean, how could my own daughter leave me off the list for her wedding? Especially when I'm the one footing the bill. It didn't make any sense. So I called the planner back, trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I asked him straight up, why aren't we on the guest list? Did Laura forget? The planner hesitated again and then dropped the bomb. He told me that Laura specifically instructed him not to invite me or Linda, and on top of that, she requested extra security to make sure we couldn't even enter the venue if we tried. I sat there stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter was planning her wedding behind my back, and she went as far as hiring security to keep me out. I mean, what the hell? At this point, I'm livid. I asked the planner to show me proof because this has to be a misunderstanding, right? Maybe there was a miscommunication or something. But nope. He forwarded me the emails, and there it was, in plain black and white. Laura had been planning this for weeks, and she made it clear that I wasn't welcome. I didn't know what to do. I felt completely blindsided. All this time, I thought I was doing something good for her, helping her out, supporting her, and she's actively keeping me from her wedding? I can't even begin to explain how hurt I was. But what hit me the hardest wasn't just being left off the guest list. It was the fact that she planned it this way. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip-up. She went out of her way to make sure I wouldn't be there. And for what? Because we had a few arguments over the years? Because I didn't always agree with her choices? That's part of being a parent. You try to guide your kids, even when they don't want to hear it. I kept thinking back to all the times I supported her. When she got in trouble in school, when she was hanging with the wrong crowd, when we had to deal with some really tough situations, I was always there. Even when she was angry at the world, I tried to be the one she could count on. And now, she's shutting me out of one of the biggest moments of her life, and I don't even get to know why. I don't want to come off as the victim here, but it felt like a slap in the face. A really cold, calculated slap. I've seen her go through phases where she'd be mad at me for something small, but she usually came around. This felt different. This felt permanent. After getting off the phone with the planner, I just sat there, staring at the email. I must have read it 100 times, hoping I'd see something that would make it all make sense, but nothing did. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But mixed with the anger was a deep sadness. It's hard to describe, but there's this feeling you get when you realize your own child doesn't want you in their life. It's like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't shake it. I kept trying to figure out what I did to deserve this. What could have pushed her this far? Sure, we've had our share of disagreements, but I never thought it would come to this. Blocking me from her wedding? Making sure I couldn't even show up if I wanted to? It's like she was punishing me, but for what? I wish I had some big conclusion to this part of the story, but I don't. That's where I was left, stunned, confused, and heartbroken. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about something much deeper, and I had no idea how to fix it. All right, so after getting that guest list and seeing my name nowhere on it, I was fuming. I couldn't just sit around with that information and do nothing. I mean, how was I supposed to act like everything was fine after finding out my own daughter had blocked me from her wedding? I knew I had to confront Laura and figure out what the hell was going on. There was no way I could just let this slide without getting some answers. So I tried calling her. No response. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. This went on for the whole day. I get it. She's busy with wedding prep and all, but I was desperate for some clarity. At this point, I couldn't tell if I was more angry or hurt, but I needed to talk to her. I left her a voicemail asking her to call me back. Nothing. Just silence. That silence was driving me crazy. After a day or two of no response, I hit my breaking point. If she wasn't going to come to me, I'd go to her. So I got in the car and drove over to her apartment. It wasn't far from where I live, and honestly, I didn't even think about what I was going to say. I just knew I needed to talk to her face to face. I figured maybe she could explain, maybe we could talk it out. Or maybe I was being naive, thinking she'd have some reasonable explanation for all this. When I got to her place, I was buzzing with adrenaline. My head was full of all the things I wanted to say, but at the same time, I wasn't sure what to expect. I knocked on the door, and after what felt like forever, Laura opened it. She looked at me like she wasn't even surprised I was there, like she'd been expecting this confrontation. That pissed me off even more, but I tried to stay calm. No need to go full-on crazy right at the start, right? We stood there for a second, and then she just asked, "What do you want, Dad?" Like I was some kind of stranger showing up uninvited. I told her straight up, "I want to know why my name isn't on the guest list. Why the hell would you block me from your wedding?" She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said something like, "I thought you'd figure it out eventually." That just made me angrier. I asked her again, trying to stay calm, but my voice was definitely shaking by this point. "Why, Laura? Why would you do this?" Her response? "It saved you the trouble of showing up." She said it so casually, like this whole thing was no big deal. I was standing there ready to explode, and she was acting like it was just another Wednesday afternoon. "I'll send you the pictures if I have time," she added, with this dismissive shrug. That's when I lost it. I couldn't hold back anymore. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I yelled. I was shaking, full of this mix of rage and heartbreak. I mean, after everything I'd done for her, this is how she treats me? I couldn't wrap my head around it. How does a daughter block her own dad from her wedding and then act like it's no big deal? But it didn't stop there. She had more to say, and none of it was good. She started listing out all these reasons for why I deserved to be left off the guest list. She said I never took her side, that I was always against her, that I'd flaunted Linda, my wife, her stepmom, in her face. She even brought up stuff from years ago, things I thought we'd moved past. She talked about times when she needed me to stand up for her, and I didn't, like when she was fighting with her cousin or when she got into trouble at school. Now, I won't lie. There were times when I couldn't defend her. She wasn't always in the right, and I wasn't going to support her when she was clearly wrong. I tried to explain that to her, but she wasn't having it. She was convinced that I'd been against her for years, that I'd abandoned her, and that this whole wedding thing was just payback. She even brought up stuff from when she was younger, like the time we had to deal with her getting caught with pills. Yeah, she had her rough patches, but I was there for her. I supported her through all of that, even when it was hard. I didn't turn my back on her when she needed help. I tried to guide her, get her the help she needed, and make sure she stayed on track, but apparently none of that mattered. In her mind, I had failed her in every way that counted. Standing there, listening to her unload all this anger, I realized how deep the resentment ran. It wasn't just about this wedding. It was years of built-up frustration that I didn't even know she was holding on to. And the way she was throwing it all at me now, like it was my fault she was so messed up, was just too much. At some point, I started tearing up. I didn't even mean to. It just happened. I asked her, practically begging, "What did I do that was so terrible, Laura? Why are you treating me like this?" I hoped deep down that maybe she'd show some sign of regret or empathy, that she'd soften, even just a little. But no, she stayed cold. "You never had my back," she said. "You were always more concerned with your new life, with Linda. You didn't care about me." That hit like a punch to the gut. I tried to explain to her that I always cared, that I loved her more than anything, but she was convinced I'd chosen my new family over her. I didn't know what to say. I was standing there in her apartment doorway, trying to figure out how we got to this point. She didn't want me at her wedding. She didn't want me in her life, apparently. And nothing I said was going to change that. It felt like we were speaking two different languages. Every time I tried to explain myself, she'd throw something else back at me, like she'd been keeping a list of all the ways I'd failed her over the years. Eventually, she told me I was just bringing negativity into her life, and that I needed to leave. She said I wasn't welcome at the wedding, or in her life, if I couldn't accept that. I walked out of there completely defeated. I didn't know what else to do. My own daughter didn't want me at her wedding, and no matter how much I tried to understand why, it all came back to this resentment she'd been holding on to for years. I was lost, hurt, and honestly more confused than ever. After I left Laura's apartment that day, I was wrecked. I didn't know what to do or where to go from there. The whole confrontation felt like it went nowhere, and everything she said just kept playing over and over in my head. I tried to keep it together, but I felt completely blindsided by her level of anger toward me. I mean, I knew we weren't super close, but to find out she thought so little of me, that hit hard. A few days went by after that, and I still hadn't heard from her. I was trying to give her space, hoping maybe she'd come around or at least calm down enough to talk rationally. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. The wedding was coming up fast, and I didn't know if I was supposed to just sit there and pretend everything was fine. I couldn't do that. I was at home with my wife, Linda, telling her everything that went down. Linda's always been patient with Laura, way more patient than I've been, but even she was done at this point. She said it was time for me to stop letting Laura walk all over me. She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make Laura happy, to keep some kind of peace between us, but nothing ever seemed to be enough. It was like no matter what I did, I couldn't win. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I couldn't just keep funding a wedding that I wasn't welcome at. I mean, think about it. I was paying for this huge celebration, covering everything from the venue to the food, and I wasn't even allowed to attend. It felt ridiculous. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Laura didn't care. She didn't care that I was hurt. She didn't care about all the money I'd spent. She didn't care about anything except herself. So I picked up the phone and called the wedding venue. I told them to cancel everything. I knew I wasn't getting my deposits back, but at that point, I didn't care about the money. It wasn't about that anymore. I just couldn't stand the idea of her going through with this wedding while I was being treated like I didn't exist. I had to take a stand, even if it hurt. The venue manager was shocked when I told him to cancel. I guess it's not every day someone pulls the plug on a wedding like that, especially so close to the date. But I didn't hesitate. I told him to go ahead and call off the caterers, the decorators, everything. I even considered canceling the wedding planner too, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to give Laura too much time to find a backup plan. I figured if I canceled just enough, she'd be left scrambling. Now, I know what some people might say, that I was being petty, that I should have just let her have the wedding and dealt with the aftermath later. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect. I was her father, and she had treated me like I didn't matter. I wasn't going to sit back and let her use me. I wasn't going to keep being her doormat. After I made the call, I sat down with Linda and we talked it over. She supported my decision 100%. She said something I'll never forget. If she doesn't respect you enough to invite you to her wedding, she doesn't deserve your money. And she was right. I had bent over backward for Laura for years, always trying to be the bigger person, always giving in. But enough was enough. The next day, things really started to unravel. The wedding planner called frantic, saying they couldn't get into the venue to start setting up. Apparently, the venue staff had already started clearing out everything. When Laura found out, I can only imagine her reaction. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard from a friend that there was absolute chaos. Guests were confused, vendors were showing up with no place to set up, and nobody had any idea what was going on. Laura tried calling me, of course, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't in the mood for another screaming match, and frankly, I didn't owe her any more explanations. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I knew she'd be furious, but after everything she'd put me through, I didn't care. She could figure it out on her own. That evening, she actually showed up at my house. I wasn't really surprised. Laura's not the type to just let things go, but I wasn't about to have a face-to-face confrontation with her again. I needed space, so I had already taken the precaution of changing the gate code so she couldn't just waltz in whenever she wanted. I wasn't hiding from her or anything, but I didn't want to let her storm in and tear into me. I'd had enough of her words. She pounded on the gate for a while, yelling for me to come out. I just sat inside, listening, but not responding. There was nothing more to say. She'd made it clear where we stood, and this was me making it clear that I wasn't going to keep letting her take advantage of me. Eventually, she gave up and left, but I knew this wasn't over. I talked to my parents later, and they weren't exactly thrilled with how I handled it. They kept saying things like, "You can't be this harsh with your own kid, and parents shouldn't abandon their children no matter what." I get where they were coming from, but they didn't see what I'd been dealing with all these years. They didn't see the constant disrespect, the entitlement, the way she had treated Linda and me. They thought I was being too harsh, but I wasn't going to change my mind. I wasn't going to let Laura's actions slide anymore. The whole thing left me feeling conflicted, though. On one hand, I knew I had done the right thing by standing up for myself. But on the other hand, this was my daughter. No matter how much she had hurt me, there was still this nagging feeling of guilt in the back of my mind. I kept thinking, did I go too far? Should I have just let her have the wedding and dealt with everything later? But then I remembered how she had looked me in the eye and told me she didn't want me there. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep bending over backward for her anymore. So, yeah, that's where things ended up. Laura's wedding plans were in shambles, and I was left wondering if there was ever going to be any kind of reconciliation. But at the end of the day, I had to protect myself. I had to protect my own peace, even if it meant losing my daughter in the process. And honestly, I don't regret it. After the whole mess with canceling the wedding, I expected some kind of fallout, but I didn't realize just how fast everything would unravel. The day after I canceled the venue, the wedding planner called me up in a complete panic. He started off all formal, trying to explain the situation, but it was obvious he was freaking out. The venue had already started shutting things down, and the caterers and decorators were locked out. Apparently, when they got to the venue that morning, security showed them the email I sent about the cancellation, and that's when everything went sideways. He was calling to ask if there was any way to salvage the situation, but I wasn't interested in playing nice anymore. I told him straight up, I'm not paying for anything. The wedding's off as far as I'm concerned. He stammered a bit, trying to reason with me, but I wasn't budging. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to be bullied into changing it just because everyone else was freaking out. The planner kept going on about how the vendors needed to be paid and how there was still time to sort things out if I just covered the remaining costs. I cut him off and told him it was no longer my problem. You'll have to talk to Laura about that, I said, and hung up. A part of me felt bad for the guy. He was just doing his job. But this situation wasn't my mess to clean up anymore. Laura had made it clear that she didn't want me involved, so I was done being the one to fix everything. Now, what happened next? I didn't find out until much later, but apparently, when Laura showed up at the venue and found out it was canceled, she absolutely lost it. I'm talking full-blown meltdown. From what I heard, she showed up expecting to see everything set up and ready to go, but instead, the place was empty. No tables, no decorations, no caterers, nothing. Just a locked gate and a confused security guard telling her she couldn't enter. She tried to call me again, of course, but I'd already blocked her number. I wasn't going to deal with another screaming match. I guess she must have thought I was bluffing or that I'd cave at the last minute. But when she realized I was serious, things really escalated. The venue security told her she couldn't come in, and that's when she snapped. From what I've been told, she started screaming at the security guards, demanding they let her in. She even threatened to sue the venue, which, let's be real, wasn't going to get her anywhere. At one point, she tried to force her way in. And that's when the guards called the cops. If it weren't for Matt, her fiancé, showing up when he did, I'm pretty sure she would have been arrested for trespassing. He managed to calm her down just before things got really out of hand. But by then, the damage was done. Her perfect day was officially ruined. Now, while all this chaos was going down at the venue, I was at home, just waiting for the inevitable knock at my door. I knew Laura wasn't the type to let something like this go, and sure enough, she showed up later that afternoon. She was banging on the gate, yelling for me to come out, but I stayed inside. I'd already decided there was no point in having another confrontation. We'd said everything that needed to be said. I could hear her yelling, telling me how I'd ruined everything and how I was being selfish. Part of me wanted to go out there and try to talk to her, to explain why I did what I did, but another part of me knew it wouldn't make any difference. Laura had made up her mind about me a long time ago, and nothing I said was going to change that. So I stayed inside, letting her rant until she eventually gave up and left. After she was gone, I sat down with Linda, and we talked about what had happened. Linda, as usual, was supportive. She kept telling me that I'd done the right thing, that it was about time I stood up for myself, but I couldn't help feeling conflicted. On one hand, I knew I had to put my foot down. Laura's behavior had been out of control for years, and this was the final straw. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt that came with knowing I'd been the one to ruin my own daughter's wedding. As the days went by, word started to spread through the family about what had happened. I hadn't told anyone yet, but apparently Laura had gone and told her side of the story to anyone who would listen. Pretty soon, I was getting calls from relatives, asking me why I'd done it, why I couldn't just let her have her day. My parents especially were disappointed. They didn't agree with how Laura had treated me, but they still thought I should have just let the wedding happen and dealt with everything afterward. I tried explaining to them that it wasn't just about the wedding. This was years of resentment and disrespect all coming to a head. I couldn't keep being the one to fix everything, especially when she didn't want me there in the first place. But they didn't get it. To them, it was just another case of a parent and child having a falling out, something that could be patched up with time. But to me, it felt like something way bigger. This wasn't just a temporary fight. It felt like a breaking point in our relationship, and I didn't know if there was any coming back from it. The rest of the week was quiet. Laura didn't try to contact me again, and I didn't reach out either. I was trying to give myself some space to process everything, but no matter what I did, the guilt kept creeping back in. I kept thinking, was I too harsh? Should I have just sucked it up and let the wedding happen? I talked to Linda about it again, and she reminded me of all the times Laura had walked all over me, all the times I'd given in just to keep the peace. She was right. I'd spent so many years bending over backward for Laura, trying to make her happy, and where had that gotten me? Shut out of her wedding, blocked from one of the most important moments of her life. At some point, enough is enough. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd made a mistake. Not in standing up for myself, that part I was sure of, but in the way I went about it. Canceling the wedding like that without any warning? Maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe if I'd tried one more time to talk to her, we could have avoided all this. But then I'd remember how she looked at me during that last confrontation, how cold and dismissive she was, and I knew there was no reasoning with her. This wasn't just a small argument. This was the result of years of pent-up anger and resentment, and it was clear she wasn't going to back down. So yeah, that's how the wedding fell apart. It wasn't pretty, and it sure as hell wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, I had to stand my ground. And while I still felt guilty, I knew that I couldn't keep letting her walk all over me. The fallout was messy, but it was necessary. Update. A week ago, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Laura's husband, Matt. It got tense to think if some mishap had happened to her. He said that she was fine, but she wanted to meet me in person. It came as a surprise to me. I asked him the reason, but he said he would tell me when we met. You said he was in the city, and if I was free, we could meet up for dinner. I said okay. I secretly wished that it was a meeting to reconcile Laura and me. I thought she wanted to meet me but was ashamed to face me, so Matt was being the middleman. I went. There was so much hope. After all, I'm a father, right? To my dismay, Matt was alone. I asked about Laura. He said he doesn't know. My heart sank, and I asked if something had happened to her and if she was fine. He told me that they were separate. He went on to reveal how Laura had been abusive in her marriage. She had real anger issues and would throw stuff at Matt and break the household stuff. Even in a minor argument, he tolerated her until he could. And when the situation got worse, he got separated from her. He said that Laura had a psychological issue and that she blamed others for any inconvenience that happened to her. She constantly used to fight with him because they had to leave the city and shift there because he got better opportunities there. Laura did not lose anything with this change. She also got a similar paying job in that city. Yeah, she was angry with him for taking her away from her hometown. That was just one thing. Laura used to be always angry at Matt and fight with them. He said that there was one more reason why he wanted to meet me in person. He wanted to say sorry. He said he witnessed Laura's cruelty towards me, Linda on my parents. But he did not intervene because Laura had manipulated him against all of us. He said that he brought misery upon himself by overlooking all the red flags. I said it was not his fault at all. It was Laura's fault. And to some extent, maybe mine, because I was not able to raise her properly. I also said sorry to him because of whatever he had been through with Laura. Matt requested me for one last favor. You said Laura had been destroyed by the separation. She's begging him to take her back, but he has fallen out of love with her because of her abuse. Yet he wishes well for her. He asked me if I could reach out to her and support her during the bad times. She literally had no friends because she lost everyone thanks to her temper. She has no real permanent friend in her life. She asked me to take her to therapy or something. I said I wish I could, but she wouldn't let me come near her. He understood my circumstances, and I understood his. We both wanted to help Laura, if at all. She would let us do so after knowing that I couldn't help but go to meet Laura. It turned out to be as expected. She dropped explosions on me and Linda, though I showed up alone. I didn't want Linda to witness Laura's wrath. I apologized to her to calm her down. I didn't think about right and wrong at that time. She was going through a rough time and I wanted to help her out. I said she could curse me whatever she wanted, but she needed to see a therapist first. She didn't listen and dug up the past. She yelled that she hated Linda to the extent that she wanted to kill her. She said that she blocked us from her wedding because she was embarrassed to introduce Linda as her stepmom. She was ashamed of her and was ashamed of me for marrying her. She didn't listen to me and chased me out of the house. She blamed me for all of her miseries in life. I don't know if I was right or wrong, and honestly, I don't care. I want her to come out of this, but I don't know how to help her. Update. Thanks for all the moral support. I was very disturbed while making the last update. The space really helped me release my nerves. Linda suggested that I take the help of Laura's best friend from school. Her family was her neighbors, so we knew each other quite well. She was now living in South Africa. I reached out to her on social media and told her about the situation. I requested her to contact Laura, and if she opened up to her, I was betting that she would because she was the only one with whom Laura never had a fight. She assured me that she would help me and convince Laura to go to therapy, and gladly she did. Laura is going to therapy and I'm guessing is going well because a week ago she met my parents and apologized to them for her misconduct. She confessed that her hatred grew so badly she was unable to control it, but she also said that she was never going to forgive me and still blames me for everything. I don't despise her anymore. I just wish her a good life, even if I'm not part of that. Thanks for all the support. I wish no father had to go through this when your child hates you to this level.
An elderly woman, forgotten and neglected by her own family, walked alone through the streets, carrying the weight of a life filled with loneliness. As she passed by a trash can, a faint sound made her stop. Her heart raced when she saw a baby abandoned among the garbage bags. Trembling, she approached, and as she picked the child up in her arms, she found a letter attached to the small body. The words written left her terrified. "I can't go on. Discovering that I am—" That unfinished sentence held a dark secret, and she knew her life would never be the same. It was a morning like any other for Maria Grazia. The sun had barely risen on the horizon, casting a pale glow over the empty streets of the neighborhood. She clutched her coat against her body while pushing her old wheelbarrow, filled with discarded items she collected to turn into something useful. At 64, life had never been easy for her, and loneliness was her only constant companion. Without children or a husband, Maria Grazia survived on the little she earned selling her crafts at fairs. As she walked, something unusual caught her attention. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, coming from a nearby trash can. Initially, she thought it was a cat or a dog trapped inside, but the sound was different, more human. Curious and a bit frightened, she approached. The trash can was filled with crumpled papers and leftover food, but deep inside something was moving. With trembling hands, Maria Grazia began to remove the garbage that covered the sound. When she finally had a clear view, her heart stopped for a second. Wrapped in a dirty blanket was a little girl with wide eyes and an innocent smile on her face. "My God," murmured Maria Grazia, bringing her hands to her mouth in disbelief. She looked around, fearing she would be seen. The street was deserted and the silence was almost oppressive. Her first instinct was to run away, to leave it all behind, as if she had never seen the child. After all, what could she, an old and poor woman, do for an abandoned baby? But something stopped her from moving. The girl's gaze, her fragility, and that small hand reaching out to her held her in place. "Who left you here?" whispered Maria Grazia, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders. Gently she cradled the baby, trying to soothe her. It was a little girl, no more than a few months old. There was an envelope attached to the blanket, along with a small bag containing some belongings. When she opened the envelope, Maria Grazia found a letter, written in careful but hurried handwriting. "Please take care of her. I can't go on. I am sick and cannot protect her. Her name is Antonella. All I ask is that she grows up in a home full of love. God bless her." Maria Grazia read the letter several times, trying to absorb what had just happened. Her body trembled, not just from the morning chill, but from the magnitude of the decision she would have to make. She looked again at the girl in her arms. Antonella. That was her name now. The baby's gentle smile shattered something inside her. The loneliness she had carried for so many years began to dissolve, replaced by a new emotion, the responsibility of being needed by someone. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The neighborhood where she lived was cruel, filled with gossip and judgment, especially for someone like her, an elderly woman who had already been betrayed and abandoned by her husband. But for some reason, the thought of leaving Antonella behind seemed even more impossible. "Come on, little one," said Maria Grazia, with a newfound determination in her voice. "Let's go home." She covered the girl with the blanket once more, placed her in her wheelbarrow, and began to push it back to her humble home. As she passed through the door, Maria Grazia felt the weight of her new reality. She had no idea how she would take care of the girl, where she would find the resources, but she knew that somehow she would find a way. She settled Antonella in an old wicker basket, improvised as a cradle, and watched the little girl fall asleep quickly, as if she knew she was now safe. Sitting at the kitchen table, Maria Grazia wondered what the future held for them. The only thing she knew for sure was that from that moment on, her life would never be the same. With the girl asleep and her heart full of doubts, Maria Grazia offered a brief prayer, thanking for the unexpected gift she had found that cold morning. She knew that the challenges were just beginning, but Antonella's smile, even in those few hours, had already sparked a flame of hope in her heart. That same night, while Antonella slept peacefully in her makeshift cradle, Maria Grazia couldn't close her eyes. She looked at the little girl, feeling a mix of fear and hope stirring inside her. Memories of her own life began to invade her mind, bringing to the surface old wounds that had never fully healed. Maria Grazia had once been married. Diego was his name. In the early years, they were happy. He was a hard-working man with a good heart, and together they dreamed of starting a family. But fate had been cruel. When she finally became pregnant, after many years of trying, their joy was shattered by tragedy. She lost the baby in a fall on a rainy day, and the pain of that moment never left her. "I also dreamed of being a mother," Maria Grazia whispered to herself, feeling a tear roll down her cheek. The loss of the child changed everything. Diego, once loving and supportive, began to drift away. Grief consumed them both, but in different ways. While Maria Grazia sank into loneliness and guilt, Diego sought refuge in other people, and eventually in another woman. He betrayed her and left, leaving her alone with the weight of a life that would never be what she had imagined. "You left me when I needed you the most," she murmured, staring into the void. Now looking at Antonella, Maria Grazia felt that something inside her was healing, even if slowly and painfully. The child had arrived unexpectedly, and the responsibility of caring for her made Maria Grazia feel useful again, something she hadn't felt in years, but the fear of failing consumed her as well. "I can't take care of you. I'm just an old woman with nothing," she said softly, as if speaking to the girl. But Antonella slept, innocent and unaware of the whirlwind of emotions passing through Maria Grazia's mind. The elderly woman's heart, however, was divided. She knew that raising a child would be difficult, especially under her current circumstances. She could barely sustain herself with what she earned from recycling and crafts, and the city, with its relentless residents, was no place for someone like Antonella. However, every time she looked at the little girl, the memory of her painful past. She remembered how she had dreamed of holding her own child in her arms, singing to him and watching him grow. What had been taken from her so cruelly now seemed to have returned unexpectedly. Diego. The name still echoed in her mind like a distant memory. Since he left her, Maria Grazia had never heard from him again, nor had she sought him out. The resentment she carried was too heavy, and reliving that past seemed futile. But now, with Antonella in her life, she felt the need to make peace with what had happened. "Maybe this is my chance to do things differently," she reflected, almost as if talking to the baby. Despite all the difficulties, something about Antonella's presence made her feel that this was her second chance. Even though she no longer had the strength and youth of her earlier days, she now possessed the wisdom of her years and the resilience of someone who had survived pain. She decided that no matter how difficult it was, she would give everything she could so that Antonella would have what she could never provide for the child she lost. Maria Grazia rose from her chair and walked to the window of her small home. The night was silent, and the cold of the early morning seeped into the room. Outside, the stars shone faintly, but the moon was full, illuminating the sleeping neighborhood. "Tomorrow will be another day," she said with a heavy sigh. She knew she couldn't count on anyone to help her. However, she also knew that she would not leave the little girl behind, just as life had left her so many times. With one last look at Antonella, Maria Grazia went to bed, still with her heart heavy. As she closed her eyes, the memories of the past began to slowly fade away, giving way to the image of an uncertain future, yet full of possibilities. The next morning brought a new light for Maria Grazia, but with it came the weight of the decisions she would need to make. The day had barely begun when Antonella woke up with her delicate cry. Maria Grazia, still getting used to the idea of caring for a child, went to the makeshift cradle and picked the girl up in her arms, trying to soothe her with a soft voice. "It's okay, Piccola. Mama is here," she said, in a tone that surprised even herself. Maria Grazia had never called herself a mother before. The sound of that word slipped from her lips, as if it had always been a part of her, and for a moment she felt more connected to Antonella than she had ever imagined. However, the reality of her situation would not take long to knock on her door. While feeding the baby with an improvised bottle, Maria Grazia began to reflect on the difficulties she would face. Her resources were limited, and the little money she earned would barely be enough to support a child. Even so, something inside her had already decided she would not leave Antonella. With Antonella in her arms, Maria Grazia stepped out onto the street, feeling the curious and suspicious gazes of her neighbors. News spread quickly in small neighborhoods, and soon everyone knew that the elderly woman had found a baby. The whispers and judging looks followed her around every corner. "Did you hear? She has a child now. I don't know how she's going to manage," one of the neighbors whispered, pressing her lips in disapproval. "That old woman can hardly take care of herself. Imagine a baby," another replied, laughing softly. Maria Grazia heard the comments but stood firm. She knew that people didn't understand her decision, but they also couldn't comprehend the emptiness she had carried for so many years. Antonella was now her light, and for the first time in a long time, Maria Grazia had something to fight for. As she collected bottles and recyclable cans in front of a store, one of the merchants, Salvatore, called her over to talk. "Maria Grazia, I heard you have a baby. Is that true?" he asked, his face creased with concern. She took a deep breath before responding. "Yes, Salvatore. I found the little girl abandoned, and I couldn't leave her there. She is my responsibility now." Salvatore looked at her with a mix of admiration and surprise. "But how will you take care of her? You know how things are around here. It won't be easy." He scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Maria Grazia nodded, aware of the difficulties. "I know it won't be easy, but I can't abandon her. I am all she has." Her voice was firm, but her eyes revealed the uncertainty she felt inside. Salvatore fell silent for a moment, but then reached out, lightly touching the elderly woman's arm. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me, Maria Grazia." She thanked him with a small smile and continued on her way, realizing that the weight of the decisions she had made wouldn't become lighter anytime soon. The town was small, and everyone knew of her situation. Gossip was inevitable, but she couldn't let it get her down. On her way home, tired and with Antonella asleep in her arms, Maria Grazia looked at the little girl and saw in her more than just an abandoned baby. She saw an opportunity to rewrite her own story, to heal the wounds she had carried from the past, and above all to give Antonella what she had never been able to provide for the child she lost. "We're going to make it, Antonella," she murmured, placing a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead. As she prepared for the night, Maria Grazia mentally organized what she needed to do. She knew she would have to keep working hard to support both of them, but she also understood that now she had a greater responsibility. She needed to ensure that Antonella was always safe, fed, and loved. Deep down, she felt fear. Fear of failing, fear of not being strong enough. But every time Antonella smiled at her, even in her fragile and vulnerable state, Maria Grazia felt her determination grow. No matter what others said, she had decided Antonella would be her daughter. The heartfelt decision was made, and there was no turning back. The sun had barely risen when Maria Grazia left home as usual, with Antonella nestled in an improvised basket. The little girl had already grown accustomed to the simple and modest routine of Maria Grazia, who took her with her wherever she went. As the elderly woman worked, collecting recyclable materials and selling her crafts, Antonella watched the world with curious eyes, absorbing every detail around her. However, that day something different was about to happen. At the end of one of the neighborhood streets, a heavy-set man watched from a distance. Diego. The name that Maria Grazia had been trying to forget for so long. He was back in town, and his presence, though silent and distant, brought with it memories that Maria Grazia preferred to keep buried. Diego had aged poorly. His once vibrant face was marked by deep wrinkles and a tired gaze. Life had not been kind to him since he abandoned Maria Grazia. After leaving her life, he had become involved in several relationships and eventually fell into addictions that corroded everything he had achieved. Now, back in town, he was not the same man Maria Grazia had known all those years ago. Diego watched her from afar as she pushed her wheelbarrow, with Antonella shielded from the wind. He had heard from some neighbors about the girl that Maria Grazia had found, and this intrigued him. He didn't quite know what he was feeling. A mix of regret and curiosity consumed him. Maria Grazia, however, had not noticed his presence. She was focused on her work, as always. When she stopped in front of a store to collect some bottles, Salvatore, the merchant, appeared again. "Maria Grazia, have you heard the latest news?" he asked, with a tense expression. She looked at him, not understanding. "No. What happened?" "Diego is back." The words came out cautiously, aware of the weight they carried. The name echoed in Maria Grazia's mind like a knife slowly turning. For a moment, she felt her legs weaken, but she quickly regained control, masking her shock. "Diego." She could barely pronounce the name as if it were a strange word in her mouth. Salvatore nodded. "Yes, it seems he came back a few days ago. No one knows for sure why, but he's around." Maria Grazia fell silent, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Diego, the man who had abandoned her during one of the toughest moments of her life, was back. She didn't know how to react. Part of her wanted to hide, to avoid any contact. But another part, the most hurt and resentful, felt the urge to confront him, to demand explanations for the wounds he had caused. "Thank you for letting me know, Salvatore," she said finally with a firm but cold voice. He nodded and stepped away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Maria Grazia looked at Antonella, who was asleep in the basket, oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions around her. How could Diego show up now just when she had found a new purpose in her life? The following days were marked by an invisible tension. Although she hadn't seen him in person, Maria Grazia knew Diego was nearby. Each step she took through the neighborhood felt accompanied by a shadow. Her heart raced at every corner, expecting him to appear before her at any moment. And then, one afternoon, while she was collecting recyclable materials on one of the more secluded streets, he appeared. "Maria Grazia." His voice echoed behind her, laden with a mix of regret and hesitation. She froze. Time seemed to stop at that moment. Slowly she turned to face him. Diego stood just a few meters away, with the same weary expression she had expected, but with something more in his eyes. Remorse. "What do you want?" Maria Grazia asked, her voice harsher than she intended. Diego hesitated, shoving his hands into his pockets and lowering his head. I heard about the girl, about Antonella," he said awkwardly. Maria Grazia felt a wave of anger rise within her. How dare he speak about Antonella? He who had abandoned her when she needed him most was now interested in the child she had taken in. "That's none of your business, Diego," she replied firmly. "You have no right to interfere in my life, not anymore." Diego looked up, hurt by her response. I know I was wrong, Maria Grazia." He took a step forward. "But I wanted to know if you're okay, if you need help." She let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to know if I'm okay after all these years?" The pain she had buried for so long began to resurface. I don't need you. I never did. I'm raising Antonella on my own, and I'm doing just fine." Diego fell silent, at a loss for words. What could he say? The wounds he had caused wouldn't heal so easily, and he knew that. "I just wanted—" He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I just wanted to know if there was anything I could do to help." Maria Grazia looked at him, her anger easing a bit, but not completely fading away. "The only thing you can do is leave me alone, Diego," she said, her voice firm but controlled. He nodded, accepting his sentence. Without another word, Diego turned and began to walk away, his figure slowly disappearing down the deserted street. The days passed slowly after the brief and painful reunion with Diego. Maria Grazia felt the weight of the past becoming lighter, but she knew that what mattered most now was Antonella's future. One morning, while Maria Grazia was finishing up a simple breakfast for herself and Antonella, a firm knock sounded at the door. Her heart raced immediately, a feeling that something was wrong. When she opened the door, she found a middle-aged woman in a formal suit, accompanied by a younger man holding a clipboard. "Good morning, ma'am," the woman said with a polite but formal smile. "I'm Clara, a social worker from the Child Welfare Department. This is my colleague, Roberto. We've received a report and would like to speak with you, if possible." Maria Grazia felt the ground shake beneath her feet. She looked at Antonella, who was innocently playing with an improvised toy, and then back at Clara. "A report?" Maria Grazia asked, trying to remain calm, but feeling anxiety rising. "About what?" Clara exchanged a quick glance with Roberto before responding. "We received a report that you are caring for a child, but do not have the necessary resources to ensure her well-being. We need to verify the conditions in which this child is living, and better understand the situation." Maria Grazia felt her heart tighten. The neighbors' gossip had finally reached its peak. The same people who had watched and whispered behind her back had now involved the authorities. She took a deep breath, trying to stay strong. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let Clara and Roberto enter. Maria Grazia's small house was modest, but clean and organized. She took pride in keeping everything in place, even with so few resources. Clara observed the surroundings carefully, her professional eyes catching every detail. Roberto took quick notes in silence as he followed the social worker. "This is Antonella," Maria Grazia said, her voice a bit shaky as she approached the girl, who looked curiously at the visitors. "I found her abandoned and decided to take care of her." Clara knelt beside Antonella, observing the little girl with a gentle gaze. She smiled at the child, who returned the gesture with a shy smile. "How old is she?" Clara asked, not taking her eyes off Antonella. "I'm not sure," Maria Grazia replied. "When I found her, there was a letter left by her mother, but not much information. By my calculations, she should be a little over a year old." Clara nodded as she stood up. "Understood. Have you managed to register custody of Antonella at any point?" The question made Maria Grazia feel even more vulnerable. She knew that without the proper documents, her situation was delicate. But until that moment, she hadn't considered the legal implications of caring for Antonella. She had simply followed her heart. "No," she replied, her voice low. "I couldn't. I didn't know what to do." Clara looked at her with understanding, but Maria Grazia knew that the social worker had a duty to fulfill, regardless of how she felt. "Mrs. Maria Grazia, I understand that your intentions are good," Clara began, her tone softer. "But without the proper documentation, we're dealing with a complicated situation. Moreover, we need to ensure that Antonella has access to medical care, education, and other resources that are essential for her development." "I'm taking care of her the best I can," Maria Grazia interrupted, feeling despair take over. "She has food, she has a roof, she has love. I didn't leave her behind like her mother did." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the pain in the elderly woman's words. "We're not saying that you're not doing your best," Clara tried to reassure her, "but there are legal issues involved, and it's our duty to ensure that Antonella is safe and has what she needs to grow up healthy." Maria Grazia looked at Antonella, who was now playing carefree. The very thought of losing the little girl made her chest ache. She didn't know how she would face that. To her, Antonella was her daughter, even if not by blood. And the idea that the authorities could take her away was unbearable. "Please don't take her away from me," Maria Grazia said, her voice breaking. "I am all she has. I swear I will do whatever it takes. If I need help, I'll accept it, but don't take her from me." Clara looked at Roberto, who was still taking notes, and then turned her attention back to Maria Grazia. "Here's what we'll do, Mrs. Maria Grazia," Clara began in a more conciliatory tone. "We will recommend support to ensure that Antonella has everything she needs. We won't make any decisions right now. We will work together to resolve this situation. I will need you to seek legal help to formalize the custody, and I will do what I can to assist with that process." Maria Grazia nodded, relieved to know that at least for now she wouldn't lose Antonella. Clara and Roberto prepared to leave, but before departing, Clara turned and said, "Remember, we're here to ensure the best for Antonella. If you need anything, I'll be nearby." As soon as the door closed, Maria Grazia collapsed into a chair, tears streaming silently down her face. The weeks following Clara's visit brought a whirlwind of emotions for Maria Grazia. The threat of losing Antonella loomed like a shadow over her life. Although the social worker had assured her that no immediate action would be taken, the fear of something happening continued to gnaw at Maria Grazia from within. She knew she needed to regularize the custody of the girl, but the process was confusing and complicated for someone like her, who had never dealt with such legal matters. One afternoon, while caring for Antonella, who was now taking her first steps in the small yard, Maria Grazia heard the phone ring. The old device, which she hardly ever used, was covered in dust, but the call felt urgent. She quickly picked it up, her heart racing. "Mrs. Maria Grazia?" It was Clara on the other end of the line. "I have news about the custody process for Antonella. I managed to schedule a meeting with a lawyer who can help you formalize the situation, but we need to act quickly. The authorities are starting to apply pressure." Panic surged up her spine. "Pressure? What does that mean? Are they going to take Antonella away from me?" Maria Grazia felt her throat tighten, as if the words could barely escape. Clara hesitated for a moment before responding gently, "We haven't reached that point yet, but we need to show that we are taking action. The lawyer I mentioned is experienced in cases like yours and can guide you. I'll send you the address so you can meet with him." Maria Grazia felt a momentary relief, but the fear still lingered. She hung up the phone and looked at Antonella, who was innocently playing with an improvised toy, unaware of the storm approaching. The little girl, with her bright eyes and easy smile, was now the center of Maria Grazia's world. The very thought of losing her made her heart ache in a way she hadn't thought possible. Days later, Maria Grazia met with the lawyer. The office was small but cozy, and the man who welcomed her, Vittorio, seemed understanding and experienced. He listened attentively as she explained how she had found Antonella, how she was taking care of the little girl, and how much it meant to her. "Mrs. Maria Grazia, I understand that you are in a difficult situation," Vittorio said, flipping through some papers she had brought. "The absence of formal custody documents is a serious issue, but not insurmountable. We need to regularize the situation as soon as possible to prevent the authorities from intervening negatively." Maria Grazia nodded, feeling the anguish tighten her chest again. "But what if I can't? What if they take her away?" The question came out laden with despair, and her eyes filled with tears. Vittorio paused for a moment and looked her in the eyes. "I'll be honest with you, Maria Grazia. If we don't do anything, the chances of Antonella being taken are real. However, if we act now and show that you are committed to following the legal procedures, we will have a strong argument to keep Antonella in your care. And of course, if there is any risk, we will fight with all our strength." Maria Grazia held back her tears, clinging to the only hope she had left. Vittorio began to guide her on the steps that needed to be taken: regular medical visits for Antonella, proof of income, testimonials from neighbors who could attest to her character and her ability to care for the girl. The following days were a whirlwind of appointments, all aimed at showing that Maria Grazia had the minimum conditions to ensure Antonella's well-being. Even with her limited resources, she worked hard to meet all the requirements. She took Antonella to the doctor, bought new clothes with her small savings, and even started talking to some neighbors to ensure they would speak in her favor, although most of them still looked at her with suspicion. Amidst all the chaos, Diego reappeared. He had tried to keep his distance after their last conversation, but upon learning that the authorities were involved, he decided to approach again. He came to Maria Grazia's house one afternoon when Antonella was napping. "Maria Grazia, can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She looked at him for a moment, feeling discomfort grow. She didn't want his presence, but she knew he wouldn't leave her in peace so easily. "What do you want, Diego? I've already told you I don't need you," Maria Grazia said, her voice firm, but her patience was limited. I heard about the situation with the authorities. I want to help." Diego looked at the ground as if carefully choosing his words. "I know I wasn't the best husband and that I left you at the worst time, but this is different. I don't want to see you lose Antonella." Maria Grazia crossed her arms, suspicious. "And what do you think you can do for us?" she asked coldly. Diego took a step forward, trying to appear sincere. "I have contacts, Maria Grazia. I know people who can help us, who can speak on your behalf and speed up the custody process. I want to make things right." The idea of accepting Diego's help repulsed Maria Grazia. He had abandoned her when she needed him most, and now suddenly he wanted to be the hero of the story. But the desperation in her heart, the fear of losing Antonella, made her hesitate. "I'll think about it," she said, not wanting to give more space to the conversation. Diego nodded and stepped back, but made it clear he was available if she needed him. Maria Grazia watched him walk away, feeling an internal conflict between her disgust for Diego and the desire to ensure Antonella stayed with her. Days later, the first hearing was scheduled. Clara would be present as a witness, and Antonella's future would be discussed. Maria Grazia knew this would be the most important moment of her life. The courtroom was filled with silence. The air felt dense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the events to unfold. Maria Grazia sat next to Vittorio, the lawyer, with trembling hands in her lap. Across the room, Clara and a representative from the Child Welfare Department observed attentively. Antonella's future was about to be decided, and the weight of this reality was almost unbearable for Maria Grazia. The judge entered, and the session began. The first part of the hearing consisted of formal introductions, with Clara explaining Antonella's situation and the effort Maria Grazia had made to care for the little girl. Clara, to Maria Grazia's surprise, spoke favorably, highlighting the dedication the elderly woman had shown and her deep love for Antonella. "I have no doubt that Maria Grazia provides Antonella with a loving home," Clara said, looking directly at the judge. "However, we also know there are financial challenges and the absence of legal custody documentation, which brings us to this process." Vittorio then stood up, ready to defend his client. "Your Honor, we are working to regularize the situation. My client, Maria Grazia, may not have all the financial resources she needs, but she has something that no institution can offer, the commitment to raise Antonella as if she were her daughter. There is no doubt that she loves this child and is willing to do whatever it takes to ensure her well-being." As Vittorio spoke, Maria Grazia looked at the door of the room, as if waiting for something bad to happen. And then it happened. The door slowly opened, and a man walked in. He was impeccably dressed, wearing a dark suit and exuding confidence. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he approached Clara's table and whispered something in her ear. Clara immediately looked up and whispered back, her face filled with surprise. "Your Honor," Clara said, interrupting Vittorio, "it seems we have new information that needs to be considered. This is Enzo Lombardi, and he claims to be Antonella's biological grandfather." Maria Grazia felt the blood drain from her face. "Grandfather? How is that possible?" She looked at Vittorio, who also seemed surprised, but tried to maintain his composure. "What kind of new information is this?" the judge asked, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through the papers in front of him. Enzo, the man who had just entered, took the floor. "Your Honor, I am Enzo Lombardi, the father of Marina, Antonella's biological mother." He looked directly at Maria Grazia, who was stunned. I recently discovered about my granddaughter's existence, and I have come to claim her custody. The silence in the room was overwhelming. Maria Grazia felt her body tremble. How could there be a grandfather, a biological family, when Antonella had been abandoned? Antonella's mother never mentioned a father or any close relatives. Maria Grazia finally managed to speak, her voice trembling. All I know is that she was sick and left the child for me to care for. How can there be someone now after all this time? Enzo nodded, appearing sincere in his response. Marina never spoke of me because we had been estranged for years. When I found out about her illness, it was too late. She passed away before I could do anything. But now that I know about Antonella, I can't just stand by. She is my granddaughter, and I want to be part of her life. The judge looked at Clara, seeking confirmation. Mr. Enzo came to our department recently after hiring a private detective to locate Antonella. We have evidence that he is indeed Marina's father, but we still need to verify all the information. Maria Grazia looked at Antonella, who was playing carefree in a corner of the room, unaware of the chaos surrounding her. Her heart ached. She knew that Enzo, with his resources and confident demeanor, could pose a real threat to her relationship with Antonella. I didn't know any of this, Maria Grazia stammered, her voice low. But Antonella is my daughter by heart. I've cared for her since I found her. It doesn't matter what biology says. She is mine. Enzo watched her for a moment, then turned to the judge. I'm not here to take Antonella from Maria Grazia, he said calmly. I want to be part of her life, yes, but I don't want to take her away from those who love her. I have resources, and I can ensure a safe future for my granddaughter. All I ask is to be present as a grandfather and help ensure that Antonella has what she needs. Those words, although reassuring, left Maria Grazia even more conflicted. On one hand, it was a relief to know that Enzo wasn't there to rip Antonella from her arms, but on the other hand, the idea of sharing custody of the little girl with a complete stranger terrified her. The judge paused, considering all the information. Mr. Lombardi, your entrance into this process is unexpected. We will need more time to analyze the evidence and determine what is best for Antonella. However, for now, we will not make any final decisions. Maria Grazia, the temporary custody of Antonella will remain with you while we continue the investigation, he said, looking directly at her. After the hearing, Maria Grazia left the courthouse with heavy steps, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Antonella, unaware of the turmoil, was in her arms, playing with a simple keychain. Enzo's presence had been an unexpected blow, and although he had not shown hostility, Maria Grazia could not fully trust his intentions. How could she? This man had appeared out of nowhere, claiming a connection to the girl who was now her daughter, in every sense but blood. On the way home, Maria Grazia walked in silence, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her thoughts were in disarray, and the fear of losing Antonella consumed her. She didn't know if she had the strength to face a new challenge, especially with someone as powerful and influential as Enzo. Upon arriving home, she found an envelope under the door. It was a letter from Enzo, asking to meet her the next day at a local cafe. He wanted to talk without lawyers or courts, just the two of them. The next day, Maria Grazia accepted the invitation. She needed to understand what Enzo really wanted. Antonella stayed with Clara, who had become an important ally in the fight for custody, while Maria Grazia went to the meeting. The cafe was small and discreet, away from the city center. When she arrived, Enzo was already sitting, dressed casually, a stark contrast to the rigid demeanor he had shown in court. He stood up when he saw her enter and greeted her with a nod. "Thank you for coming, Maria Grazia," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. She sat down, keeping a cautious gaze. "I'm here because I want to understand what you really want, Enzo," Maria Grazia began straightforwardly. "You appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be Antonella's grandfather, and now you want to be part of her life. But what does that really mean?" Enzo took a deep breath, seeming thoughtful for a moment before responding. "I understand your suspicion," he said calmly. "I would be suspicious too in your place. The truth is, until recently, I didn't know about Antonella's existence. My daughter Marina and I had been estranged, and I only learned about her illness and my granddaughter when it was too late." Maria Grazia kept her gaze fixed, trying to read the intentions behind his words. "But why now?" she asked. "Why show up now when Antonella is already in my care? She is happy with me and I'm taking care of her with all the love I can offer." Enzo nodded, as if he were weighing each word before responding. "I don't want to take Antonella away from you, Maria Grazia," he said sincerely. "In fact, I admire what you've done. Adopting a child, especially under your circumstances, is an act of love and courage. But I am her grandfather, and I also have responsibilities. I have resources, connections, and I can ensure that Antonella has a safe future. I don't want to replace you. I just want to be present as a grandfather." Maria Grazia fell silent, her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt as she tried to absorb what he was saying. "And what exactly do you propose?" she asked, her voice softer, still filled with uncertainty. Enzo leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I propose a partnership, Maria Grazia," he said with a sincere tone. "You continue taking care of Antonella, being her mother, as you've always done. I won't interfere with that, but at the same time, I would like to be part of her life. I want her to know that she has a larger family, that she has a grandfather who can support her when needed. Moreover, I can help you. I know the financial situation isn't easy, and I want Antonella to have what she deserves." Maria Grazia looked at him bewildered. It was a generous offer, but she knew that accepting meant allowing Enzo to enter their lives, and that made her uncomfortable. "I don't need charity," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Antonella is happy with the little we have. I don't want her to feel torn between two worlds." Enzo shook his head. "It's not charity, Maria Grazia," he corrected gently. "It's a way to ensure that Antonella has the best of both worlds. You're already doing an amazing job caring for her, but I can help make things easier. I want her to have opportunities that you might not be able to provide on your own, and I want to do this without taking away what you've already built with her." Maria Grazia felt the weight of the offer. On one hand, accepting Enzo's help meant securing a more stable future for Antonella. On the other hand, she feared it would create an emotional distance between her and the little girl. "And what if she becomes closer to you than to me?" Maria Grazia asked, her voice finally revealing the vulnerability she felt. "What if she forgets me?" Enzo sighed, looking directly at her. "That will never happen," he said firmly. "The bond you have built with Antonella is unbreakable. I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to add something to her life, not to take your place." Maria Grazia remained silent for a long time. She thought about Antonella, the smiling girl she had taken in without hesitation, and the uncertain future that now awaited them. Enzo seemed sincere, and his offer was tempting, but Maria Grazia knew that the decision needed to be made carefully. Finally, she lifted her eyes and replied, "I accept your help, Enzo," she said, her voice firm but full of emotion. "But with one condition. You will not interfere with how I take care of Antonella. She is my daughter in heart, and nothing will change that." Enzo smiled, relieved. "I agree, Maria Grazia," he said with a respectful tone. "Let's work together to ensure that Antonella has everything she needs. I won't interfere. I'll be here as support, not as a threat." The days following the agreement between Maria Grazia and Enzo brought a mix of relief and apprehension. Their interactions were initially cautious. Enzo visited Maria Grazia's home regularly, always bringing something for Antonella: children's books, simple toys, or sometimes even a treat. The little girl, curious by nature, gradually began to warm up to him with that innocent trust that only children possess. For Maria Grazia, each interaction between them was proof that her fear of losing the bond between them was strong, unshakable, and Antonella made that clear every time she ran into Maria Grazia's arms at the end of each visit from Enzo. "She likes you, Maria Grazia," Enzo commented one afternoon while watching Antonella play in the yard. "You are her mother, that's clear, and I respect that." Maria Grazia looked at him, relieved but still cautious. "That's all I want, Enzo. For her to know that, no matter what happens, I will always be here for her," she replied, her voice soft but firm. Enzo nodded, showing that he understood the depth of the connection between Maria Grazia and Antonella. It was clear to him that there was no replacing the place Maria Grazia occupied in the girl's heart. He wanted to be a present grandfather, but never a competitor. As time went on, Antonella began to refer to Enzo as nonno, grandfather. The word rolled off her tongue naturally, and when he heard it for the first time, Enzo was almost moved to tears. For him, that word meant that, in some way, he had found a place in the girl's life. Maria Grazia, on the other hand, watched the moment with mixed feelings, but she allowed herself to relax, understanding that Antonella still ran to her arms for comfort and affection. "She's happy, Maria Grazia," Enzo said, smiling as he watched Antonella flip through one of the books he had brought. "And that's all that matters." Life continued with this new dynamic. Enzo helped financially, ensuring that Antonella had access to doctors, clothes, and a proper education. Despite her initial distrust, Maria Grazia began to realize that Enzo was genuinely committed to being part of his granddaughter's life, without interfering in her upbringing. He respected the boundaries that Maria Grazia had set, and gradually the two began to understand each other. However, not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. Diego, Maria Grazia's ex-husband, learned about Enzo's presence and the changes in the life of the woman he had abandoned. Driven by a mix of curiosity and resentment, Diego began to lurk around Maria Grazia's house more frequently. Although he didn't approach directly, his presence was felt, like a shadow from the past that Maria Grazia preferred to forget. One night, while Antonella slept peacefully, Maria Grazia went out to the porch to breathe in the fresh night air. To her surprise, she found Diego standing on the corner, watching the house from afar. "What are you doing here, Diego?" she asked, her voice firm and filled with disdain. He hesitated before answering, as if struggling to find the right words. I heard about what's happening, about Enzo, about Antonella," he began, his voice low, "and I wanted to know how you are." Maria Grazia let out a bitter laugh. "You want to know how I am? After all these years? After everything you did?" She shook her head, incredulous. "I don't need you, Diego. Antonella is my daughter now, and we're fine without you." Diego took a step forward, trying to get closer. "I know I was wrong, Maria Grazia," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "but I don't want to lose the little I have left. Maybe I can help." Maria Grazia crossed her arms, feeling a growing anger. "Help?" she repeated incredulously. "You had your chance, Diego, and you threw it away. I don't need you, and Antonella certainly doesn't." Diego lowered his head, defeated. "I just wanted to make things right," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Maria Grazia watched him for a moment, her anger still present but mixed with a sense of pity. "You made your choices, Diego, and I made mine. Now go away. There's nothing left for you here." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the regret of years of mistakes and poor decisions. Without another word, Diego turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Maria Grazia stood there, feeling the weight of that encounter, but also a sense of relief. The past was finally being left behind. The next day, Maria Grazia and Antonella joined Enzo for a walk in the park. The sun was shining brightly, and Antonella was joyfully running between the trees, laughing with the innocence of a child who has no worries in the world. "She is a special girl," Enzo said, watching the scene with a smile. Maria Grazia agreed. "Yes, she is," she said, looking at Antonella with tenderness. "And no matter what the future brings, we will make sure she stays this way, happy and loved." As she watched Antonella play, Maria Grazia felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Despite all the challenges, she had found a new family. Antonella had a home, a loving grandfather, and Maria Grazia finally allowed herself to believe that the future would be kinder than the past. As the months went by, the lives of Maria Grazia, Antonella, and Enzo found a new normal. The bond between them grew stronger, and the little girl was surrounded by love and security. Maria Grazia, though always cautious, began to realize that with Enzo's help, Antonella would have opportunities that she could never provide on her own. But that didn't mean she would stop being the mother the girl needed. Her constant presence, care, and dedication never wavered. Doctor visits became regular. Antonella started attending a nearby daycare, and the resources Enzo provided allowed the girl to have everything a child her age needed to grow happy and healthy. Maria Grazia continued her work in recycling and crafts, always finding time to be with Antonella, whether helping with schoolwork or simply telling stories before bed. One day, while they were walking through the town square, Antonella asked Maria Grazia an unexpected question. "Mommy, do you think I can be anything when I grow up?" Maria Grazia looked at the girl, surprised by the depth of the question, especially for someone so young. She smiled, her eyes misting with emotion. "Yes, Antonella," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "You can be anything you want, and I will always be here to support you." Antonella smiled back, pleased with the answer, and went back to running around the park, exploring every corner as if it were a new world. Enzo, who was sitting next to Maria Grazia, also smiled, watching the girl with tenderness. "She's lucky to have you," he commented, looking at Maria Grazia with admiration. "We're lucky to have her," Maria Grazia replied, her tone filled with gratitude. "She changed my life, Enzo. At first I was lost, but now I feel like I've found a purpose." Enzo nodded, fully understanding what Maria Grazia meant. For him, Antonella had also been an unexpected blessing, a second chance to build something he never had with his daughter, Marina. However, as life stabilized, there was still one last pending issue, the final hearing regarding Antonella's custody. Although Maria Grazia had temporary custody, the judge still needed to make a definitive decision. The support from Enzo, the financial help, and the good relationship between the two counted in her favor. But Maria Grazia knew that the system was unpredictable, and the ghost of Diego, still occasionally lurking, added another layer of uncertainty to the situation. When the day of the final hearing arrived, Maria Grazia was more nervous than she had ever been. She and Enzo sat side by side in the courtroom, waiting for the judge's decision. Vittorio, the lawyer, had presented a strong case, arguing that Antonella was being cared for with love and dedication, that she had a safe home, and that her education and health were assured. To Maria Grazia's relief, Diego did not show up. It seemed he had finally understood that his place in their lives had disappeared. The judge flipped through the papers in front of him, carefully analyzing every detail. After a few moments of silence that felt like an eternity, he finally looked up. "After reviewing all the documents and considering the involved witnesses, I have reached a decision," the judge announced, in a serious yet calm tone. "The legal custody of Antonella will remain with Maria Grazia, who has proven to be the best caregiver for the girl. However, we recognize Mr. Enzo Lombardi's role as a grandfather and financial supporter, and his presence will be encouraged in the upbringing of Antonella." Maria Grazia felt a wave of relief wash over her. Tears began to stream down her face as she looked at Enzo, who was also smiling, clearly relieved by the decision. "Thank you very much, Your Honor," Maria Grazia said, her voice choked with emotion. The judge nodded. "I certify that this child will be well cared for," he said with a slight smile, "and that above all she will be surrounded by love." As they left the courtroom, Maria Grazia hugged Antonella tightly, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The future, which had once seemed uncertain and full of obstacles, now appeared clearer. Antonella was her daughter, in heart and soul, and nothing could change that. "Let's go home, Piccola," she whispered in Antonella's ear, who smiled and nodded. The following months were peaceful. Antonella continued to grow, becoming more curious and full of energy each day. Maria Grazia and Enzo, now with a relationship built on respect and cooperation, worked together to ensure that the little girl had everything she needed. Enzo's support was essential, but Maria Grazia's love was what truly guided Antonella on her path. One day at the end of a summer afternoon, as the sun set on the horizon, Maria Grazia watched Antonella play in the yard. Enzo was beside her, and they both contemplated the simple joy of the little girl. "I think everything turned out well in the end," Enzo said with a light smile. Maria Grazia nodded, her eyes filled with tenderness. "Yes," she replied, her heart at peace. "Everything turned out well. Antonella found her family, and so did I." And so, under a sky painted orange and pink, Antonella ran freely, surrounded by a love that protected and guided her, ready to face the world, knowing she would never be alone. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to be the first to receive the next video. Share it with your friends and check out the video on the end screen. You're going to be moved.
Stepsister stole my car and wrecked it, but Dad defended her. So I left, but now she wants to move with me. So yeah, my name's Laura, and when I was 13, my life pretty much turned into a mess. I guess it started with my parents' divorce. Not that I was surprised by it or anything. I mean, they were always arguing, shouting at each other over the dumbest stuff. My dad was this guy who always had something to complain about. And my mom? Well, she didn't have the patience to deal with him. So the split was inevitable, I think. At first, I thought maybe things would calm down after the divorce, like no more fights, just peace and quiet. But nah, things got a lot weirder. Fast. They agreed to split custody of me. Weekdays with my dad and weekends with my mom, since she had this demanding job. So I'm bouncing back and forth between their houses, and it's lonely, man. Being an only kid, I didn't have anyone to talk to about how messed up everything felt. But then, 3 months after the divorce, my dad hits me with this announcement. He's got news, big news. He's getting remarried, and he's moving in this woman, Mary, along with her daughter, Jessica. He's acting like it's the best thing ever, like I should be happy to suddenly have a new sister. I remember sitting there, just nodding along. But inside, I was screaming. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want a new mom, and I definitely didn't want some stranger invading my space. So, I meet them. Mary seemed all right at first, kind of cold, but not rude. But Jess? She's like this perfect, shiny 14-year-old, all smiles and sweetness. At least that's what everyone else saw. The first couple of weeks I was trying to be nice, get along, But it became clear real quick that this wasn't going to be like some Disney movie where we all magically get along and become one big happy family. Nope. Jess was the favorite right off the bat, and it sucked. Like, on her birthday, my dad threw her this big party with cake, decorations, the whole deal. And I'm just standing there like, what the hell? Because my birthday was 2 months before that. And guess what I got? Nothing. Not even a happy birthday from him. I'm not exaggerating. He legit forgot. But for Jess? Oh, she was the princess, and I was just there. It didn't stop there either. My dad started driving her to school every day, which was just another slap in the face because I still had to take the bus like some random nobody. And then, if I ever did something wrong, like literally anything, my dad would be on me in a second, criticizing me for not being like Jessica, who's always so well behaved. Yeah, right. I remember one time I came home from school, and Jess had borrowed my favorite sweater without asking. And when I told her not to touch my stuff again, she ran to my dad, fake crying, acting like I was being mean to her. What did my dad do? Took her side, of course, saying I needed to learn to share. It was ridiculous. I mean, this girl was constantly taking my things, makeup, clothes, even my school supplies, and somehow I was always the one who ended up being the problem. The worst part? My dad wasn't even trying to hide the favoritism. It was like he had completely forgotten I existed. Like, I was no longer his daughter, just this annoying person who was in the way. Jess was the perfect one who could do no wrong, while I was invisible unless I was being criticized. It wasn't just my dad either. Mary never missed a chance to make me feel small, either ignoring me or lecturing me about how I should be more like her daughter. By the time I was 16, I was pretty much checked out of my family. I stopped trying to bond with them or be part of their happy little world because it was clear that I didn't fit. So I focused on myself. I got a job, started saving money, and after a while, I managed to buy my own car. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, and it felt like the only thing in my life I actually had control over. My mom chipped in to help me buy it, but I was covering all the insurance, gas, and other expenses myself. My dad didn't offer to help, of course. Why would he? He was too busy paying for everything Jess wanted. Honestly, I didn't care, though. Having that car was my little bit of freedom, something that was just mine, But then, Jess started to notice. She'd wrecked her own car a few weeks after I got mine. Big surprise, right? So now she was bugging me to borrow mine all, "Oh, Laura, I really need it just for today." I shut her down every time. I wasn't stupid. I knew she didn't give a damn about my stuff and would probably trash it just like hers. But she kept pushing. I stood my ground, though, telling her flat out no, every time. Then one day, I came home from school, and my car wasn't in the driveway. My heart sank immediately because I knew what had happened. Sure enough, Jess had taken my car without asking, and when she got back later that night, around 10 p.m., the front of it was all smashed up. She didn't even apologize, just handed me the keys like nothing had happened. I stormed into the house, ready to explode, and went straight to my dad. I thought finally he's going to see how messed up this is and back me up. Right? Wrong. Instead, I got a lecture about being selfish. Selfish because I didn't want to share the car I had worked for, paid for, and maintained on my own. He didn't care that Jess had stolen it and wrecked it. Nope, it was my fault for not letting her borrow it in the first place. Mary chimed in too, of course, like it was some sort of family gang-up. They all turned on me, making me feel like I was crazy for even being mad. Jess? She sat there, acting all innocent, like she didn't just steal and wreck my car. I was furious. I could feel my blood boiling, but there was no point arguing anymore. So the next day, I packed up my things and moved to my mom's place. My dad didn't even try to stop me. He didn't care. I was just gone from his life. And that was it. 5 years went by without a word from him or Jess. Not one phone call, not one text, nothing. But honestly, I didn't miss them. So fast forward 5 years. I'm in college, living my own life, and things are going pretty good. I mean, I'm not rich or anything, but I'm making it work. I got a place off campus, a job that pays the bills, and friends who actually care about me, unlike my so-called family. Life finally felt like it was mine. Then, out of nowhere, I start getting these calls. At first it was just one or two, and I didn't recognize the number, so I ignored them. I'm not the type to answer calls from numbers I don't know. Too many scammers out there, you know? But then, the calls kept coming. Same number, over and over again. I was like, what the hell? So I finally answer, thinking maybe it's important or something. And guess who it is? Jessica. Freaking Jessica. I hadn't heard from her in 5 years. 5 years of nothing from her or my dad. The second I heard her voice, my stomach dropped. Like, what could she possibly want after all this time? She didn't even sound like she cared about not speaking to me for years. She just jumped right into it like we'd talked yesterday. No big deal. Hey, Laura, it's been so long. How have you been? I was kind of stunned at first. I didn't know whether to laugh or hang up. I decided to just be polite for the moment because I was curious about what she wanted. No way she was calling out of the blue just to chat, right? I'm fine, I guess. What's up, I said, keeping it short because I wasn't in the mood for small talk. She starts going on and on about how she's moving to my city for a new job or something. Apparently she's had a rough couple of months, lost her place, and now she's relocating. I'm just sitting there listening, thinking, why are you telling me all this? And then she hits me with it. So I was wondering if I could crash at your place for a while, you know, just until I get settled. I heard from Dad that you live there, and I figured we could help each other out. I almost dropped my phone. First off, Dad was still apparently keeping tabs on me, which was creepy enough, but the fact that Jess just assumed I'd let her move in after 5 years of silence? I couldn't believe the nerve. It wasn't like we were close before. She ruined my car, and now she thinks I'm just going to welcome her with open arms? I took a second before answering because I didn't want to just yell no and hang up, even though that's what I felt like doing. I don't know, Jess. I mean, I don't really have room for anyone else here, and I've been managing on my own for a while now, I said, trying to sound as calm as possible, but inside I was raging. She didn't even hesitate. Oh, I won't take up much space. I don't even have much stuff with me, and I won't be able to pay rent right away. But you've been living there on your own, so I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like I should just be cool with the fact that she expected to live rent-free in my place. It wasn't even a request at that point. It was more like she'd already made up her mind and was just waiting for me to say yes. But here's the thing. I've worked hard to get where I am. I don't have a lot, but I've been doing everything on my own. There's no way I'm letting someone who wrecked my car and hasn't spoken to me in years just waltz back into my life and take advantage of me. I'm sorry, Jess, but that's not going to work for me, I said, finally just putting it out there. I've got my own stuff going on, and I'm not really in a position to have anyone else staying here right now. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course, she wasn't done. Laura, come on, it's just for a little while. I won't be any trouble, I promise. I just need a place to crash. You're my sister, you can't just leave me hanging like this. I could hear the frustration in her voice, but that didn't make me feel any more guilty. If anything, it made me mad. Now, I was her sister? Where was all this family talk when she and my dad made my life hell? Where was she when I moved out and never heard from them again? I took a deep breath. Look, I'm sorry you're going through a tough time, but I can't help you. You'll have to find another place. I'm sure there are other options. Her tone changed real quick. She went from fake sweet to irritated in a second. I can't believe you're being like this. I thought we were past all that old stuff. You've been doing fine, and it's not like you don't have space. This isn't fair, Laura. I had to laugh at that. Fair? Since when was life ever fair for me? I was done. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into this. Jess, I don't owe you anything. I've been taking care of myself just fine without you or Dad, and I'm not going to change that now. I'm sorry if you're struggling, but that's not my responsibility." There was a long pause, and I could tell she was fuming. But honestly, I didn't care. I'd spent enough years bending over backward for people who didn't care about me, and I wasn't about to start doing it again. "Well, thanks for nothing," she snapped before hanging up on me. And just like that, the conversation was over. I sat there for a minute, just staring at my phone. I felt a weird mix of emotions, relief, anger, disbelief, but mostly I just felt tired. Like, why did I even have to deal with this? I had built my own life, moved on from the mess of my childhood, and now they were trying to drag me back into it. But at least I stood my ground. That's one thing I've learned over the years. If you don't stick up for yourself, people will walk all over you. And I'm done being walked on. Update 1. So after the whole mess with Jessica, I figured things would go quiet again, like they had been for the past 5 years. I was actually kind of relieved after I told her no. I didn't feel bad about it because honestly, she didn't deserve my help after everything. But life doesn't just let you move on that easy, right? It was a few days after the whole Jessica thing, and I was just chilling, trying to get some schoolwork done, when my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was my dad. Yeah, my dad, who hadn't bothered to contact me once in 5 years. I stared at the screen for a second, kind of frozen, because I honestly didn't expect him to call me. Ever. A bunch of thoughts rushed through my head. Maybe he was calling to apologize, or maybe he had finally realized how badly he treated me. I don't know. I guess part of me was still holding out hope that he would call, just to say, "Hey, how are you? I miss you," or something like that. So stupidly, I answered. "Hello," I said, trying to keep it neutral because I wasn't sure what was coming. "Laura," he said in that serious, annoyed tone he always used, like he was about to lecture me. Right then, I knew this wasn't going to be a nice conversation. "Hi, Dad," I replied, already feeling the tension building. "I heard from Jessica," he said, and immediately I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Of course, he was calling because of her. "Oh yeah?" I said, trying not to let the frustration leak into my voice. He sighed, the kind of sigh that made it sound like I was the problem here. "She told me you refused to help her. She needed a place to stay, and you just turned her away. How could you do that to your sister?" My sister. He actually had the nerve to call her that. I hadn't heard from him in years, and now he was coming at me, accusing me of being selfish because I didn't let the girl who wrecked my car and ignored me for half a decade crash at my place. I could barely believe it. "Dad," I said, trying to stay calm even though I was boiling inside. "Jessica and I haven't spoken in 5 years. She took my car without asking, wrecked it, and you didn't even care. You didn't even check on me after I moved out. Now she suddenly needs a place to stay, and I'm just supposed to forget everything and let her move in? You're still holding on to that?" he snapped, like I was being unreasonable for remembering the whole car incident. "That was years ago, Laura. She's your family. You need to get over it." Get over it? Seriously? It wasn't just about the car. It was about being ignored, being treated like I didn't matter for years, while he doted on Jess like she was his real daughter. I wasn't going to let him twist this around and make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. "Dad, it's not just about the car. You and Jessica made my life hell back then. You never cared about me unless I was in trouble or being criticized. I'm not going to let someone who's treated me like crap for years just walk back into my life because now they need something." There was a pause on the line, and for a second I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to him. Maybe he would see things from my perspective for once. But nope. Instead, he exploded. "You're so selfish," he yelled. "All these years, I thought you'd grow up and learn how to be part of a family, but you're just as inconsiderate as ever. Jessica needed you, and you turned your back on her. What kind of person does that?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was selfish? The guy who hadn't spoken to me in years, who never once checked to see if I was okay after I moved out, was now calling me selfish because I didn't want to let his golden child mooch off me? It was like I was living in some kind of twisted alternate reality. "Dad, you have no idea what my life has been like for the past 5 years," I said, my voice shaking now because I was so angry. "You've never even asked. You didn't care when I left. You didn't care when I struggled to get by on my own, and now you suddenly want to lecture me about family? You don't get to do that." He went quiet for a moment, but I knew he wasn't done. I could almost picture him pacing around trying to come up with something to say that would make me feel like the bad guy. "You're going to regret this one day," he said, his voice low but still full of anger. "When you realize you pushed your family away and there's no one left to help you, you'll see how wrong you are. I'm disappointed in you, Laura. I really am." That was it. That was the breaking point for me. I'd spent years trying to figure out why my dad didn't love me the way he loved Jessica, why he treated me like I was a burden instead of his daughter. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need to keep trying to make him see my worth. If he was disappointed in me, that was his problem, not mine. I'm done, Dad, I said, my voice steady now. If you want to be disappointed in me for standing up for myself, then fine. But I'm not going to apologize for not letting someone who's been nothing but toxic into my life again. You and Jessica made your choices. Now I'm making mine. There was silence on the other end, and I knew he wasn't going to apologize. That wasn't in his nature. Instead, he did what he always did, hung up on me without another word. Just like that, the conversation was over, and so was my relationship with him. For good this time. I sat there for a while, just staring at my phone, trying to process everything. It was hard, you know? No matter how bad things were, a part of me still wanted to believe that my dad would come around eventually, that maybe we could have a real father-daughter relationship someday. But after that call, I knew it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't sad, though. Not really. More like relieved. Like I could finally stop hoping for something that was never going to be. I had my own life now, and I didn't need his approval to be happy. I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually move on. Update 2. So, a little context before diving into this. My birthday's never really been a big deal. At least, not since I was a kid. Growing up, it was always kind of forgotten or brushed off, especially after Jessica showed up and took over the spotlight. But I'd gotten used to it. These days, I didn't expect much. Maybe a couple of texts from friends, a casual dinner or something. But this year? Well, this year was different. It started like a normal day. I woke up, checked my phone, saw a couple of happy birthday messages from some close friends, and went about my day. I wasn't planning anything special, just chilling at home and maybe treating myself to a little takeout later. You know, something low-key. Then my phone buzzed again, and I saw the name on the screen. It was my dad. Yeah, my dad calling me on my birthday. After 5 years of silence, after everything that had happened with Jessica, after the blow-up call we had a few days ago, now he was calling me. I stared at the phone for a second like, what does he want now? Part of me didn't want to answer. I mean, I figured it'd just be more drama, right? But I don't know. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some tiny part of me hoping that for once he was going to wish me a happy birthday or maybe even apologize. So yeah, I answered. Hey, I said, keeping it short, trying not to sound too eager or annoyed. Laura, he started, his voice way too formal, like he was getting ready for a business call. I've been thinking about our last conversation. Great. Here we go, I thought. He's going to double down on everything again. But what he said next caught me off guard. Listen, it's your birthday, and I know we've had our differences. I just want to say, happy birthday. For a split second, I didn't even know how to react. I mean, this was the first time in years he'd acknowledged my birthday at all, let alone called me. It wasn't some heartfelt, tear-jerking apology or anything, but it was something. Thanks, I replied, a little confused. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. There was this awkward silence for a moment, like he didn't know what to say next. I could almost picture him sitting there, trying to figure out how to keep the conversation going without getting into the mess from before. So, how are you doing? He asked, and it sounded so forced. Like, I could tell he wasn't really interested in how I was doing. It was more like he was just going through the motions, ticking boxes in his head. I'm good, I said, not wanting to dive into anything too deep. I didn't really trust where this was going, but I figured I'd play along for now. Just, school, work, same old stuff. Another pause. Then he finally said what I knew was coming. Jessica told me you were pretty harsh with her the other day, he said, his voice shifting back to that serious, almost condescending tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. I don't understand why you're still holding on to all that anger. And there it was. I should have known better. Of course, this wasn't just a birthday call. This was him trying to patch things up between me and Jessica, as if all the years of crap she put me through didn't matter. Like I was the one who needed to make amends. Dad, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, even though I could feel my frustration building again. It's not about anger. It's about boundaries. I've moved on from everything that happened, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to let Jessica walk back into my life like nothing happened. You can't expect me to just forget everything. You need to let go of the past, he said, like he hadn't even heard a word I'd said. She's trying to move forward, and you should too. This isn't what family does. We're supposed to support each other. I could feel my blood boiling at this point. I had spent years trying to get him to support me, and now he was acting like I was the one who had failed the family. It was like he had completely rewritten history in his head, where Jessica was the victim and I was the villain. Dad, I did support her, I shot back, finally letting some of my frustration out. For years, I put up with everything she and Mary threw at me. I was the one who had to deal with being ignored, pushed aside, and treated like crap. And now, when I finally stand up for myself, I'm the bad guy? How is that fair? There was this long pause, and I thought maybe I had gotten through to him. Maybe he'd finally see things from my side. But nope. He just sighed, like he was tired of having to deal with me. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be, Laura," he said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice now. "Jessica's your sister. You need to act like it." And that's when I realized he was never going to get it. No matter what I said, no matter how many times I explained it, he was always going to take Jessica's side. She was the daughter he chose, and I was the one he put up with. "I am acting like it," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I'm just acting like the sister she deserves. You can't force me to forgive her just because it's easier for you. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." There was another silence, and this time it was heavy, like he didn't know what to say next, or maybe he just realized he wasn't going to win this one. "Fine," he finally said, his voice clipped. "But don't come crying to me when you realize you've burned every bridge you have left." And with that, he hung up. I sat there for a minute, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. I wasn't even mad at that point, just done. Done with trying to get my dad to see me. Done with hoping for something that was never going to happen. It wasn't the birthday I expected, but maybe it was the one I needed, because now I knew for sure. My dad was never going to change, and I didn't need him to. I was fine on my own. Fine on my Update 3. So after that birthday call from my dad, I really thought I was done with them. I mean, it was pretty clear he wasn't interested in actually hearing me or understanding anything from my side. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I was ready to move on for good, or at least that's what I thought. But life always seems to throw one more thing at you when you least expect it, right? And this time it came in the form of another call. But not from my dad. This time it was from my mom. Now my relationship with my mom has always been kinda distant. She wasn't really involved in the whole mess with my dad and Jessica because, well, she had her own stuff going on. Her job kept her super busy, and honestly, she never seemed to want to get involved. She was more of a you handle your own problems type of person. So when she called, I wasn't sure what to expect. We hadn't really talked about any of the drama that had been happening recently, and I figured maybe she was just calling to check in or ask about school. "Hey, Mom," I answered, trying to sound casual, even though I was a little on edge after everything that had been happening. "Hi, Laura," she replied, her voice sounding more serious than usual. "I wanted to talk to you about something. It's about your dad and Jessica." Here we go again, I thought. "Yeah?" I said, already bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "I know things have been rough between you and them," she started, "but your dad called me yesterday. He's really worried about you, Laura. He thinks you've been shutting everyone out." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Worried about me? That was rich, coming from a guy who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, except to yell at me for not letting Jessica move in. "Mom, I'm not shutting everyone out," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just don't want to deal with people who only care about me when they need something. Dad's only calling because Jessica wants something, and I'm not playing that game anymore." "I get that," she said, in that way people do when they clearly don't get it. "But family is family, Laura. You can't just cut them out of your life forever. At some point, you're going to need them." I couldn't believe she was saying this. After everything that had happened, after all the years of being ignored, suddenly I'm supposed to need them? "Mom, I don't need them," I said, a little sharper than I meant to. "I've been fine on my own. I'm in school. I'm working. I've built my own life. They haven't been there for me, so why should I be there for them now?" She sighed, and I could tell she was getting frustrated. "Look, I'm not saying what they did was right, but sometimes you have to be the bigger person. Holding on to all this resentment is only going to hurt you in the long run." There it was again. Another person telling me to just let it go like it was so easy. Like years of neglect and being treated like an outsider in my own family could just be forgotten because family. "Mom, this isn't about resentment," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about respect. They've never respected me, and I'm not going to keep letting them walk all over me just because we're related. I've spent too long trying to be the bigger person, and it's gotten me nowhere." She didn't say anything for a minute, and I could hear her thinking it over. I hoped, for a second, that maybe she'd finally understand. But then she said the last thing I expected. You know, your dad's right, she said quietly. You've always been so stubborn. You never let anyone in. That's why things are like this. I was stunned. Stubborn? Me? I'd been bending over backward for years, trying to fit into a family that never wanted me, and now I was the stubborn one? Are you serious right now? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. I'm the one who's been stubborn? I'm the one who's wrong here? I'm just saying, she replied, her voice calm like she was giving me some kind of life lesson. If you don't learn to let people in, you're going to end up alone. That was it. The final straw. I couldn't believe that even my mom, the one person who should have understood what I'd been through, was blaming me for everything. Mom, if letting people in means getting treated like garbage, then yeah, maybe I will end up alone, I snapped. But at least I won't be miserable. I'm done being the one who has to make everything better. If they want to fix things, that's on them, not me. She didn't say anything after that. I think she realized she'd pushed too far, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was done. With all of it. I gotta go, I said, cutting the conversation short before she could say anything else. Laura. But I didn't wait for her to finish. I hung up and just sat there, staring at my phone, trying to wrap my head around the fact that even my own mom was siding with them. At that moment, I realized something. I didn't need their approval. Not from my dad, not from Jessica, and not even from my mom. I'd spent too long trying to get people to see me, to value me, and all it had done was make me feel worse. So yeah, maybe I was stubborn. Maybe I was shutting people out. But if that meant protecting myself from getting hurt again, then so be it. I'd rather be alone and happy than surrounded by people who didn't really care about me. And with that, I finally felt like I could move on. For real this time.